February 15th, 1944. The wind howled over the Leary Valley. A gray morning sun fought its way through the fog that blanketed the Italian mountains. On a ridge high above the smoke and the mud stood an ancient monastery, Monte Cassino. For nearly 14 centuries, it had watched over this land, unbroken by time, untouched by war. But on that cold February morning, the world below, it was preparing to destroy it. The monastery, built in the year 529 by Saint Benedict himself, had survived barbarians, earthquakes, and empires. It was a beacon of faith. Its bells once rang for peace. Its stones whispered prayers of hope. Yet now, those same stones stood at the heart of one of the deadliest battles of World War II. Down in the valley, the rumble of engines echoed like distant thunder. Columns of American M4 Shermans rolled through the mud, their hulls coated in grime and smoke. Infantrymen huddled in foxholes, shivering beneath wet blankets, watching the misty mountain that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. Every man knew what lay up there, German guns, or at least that's what they'd been told. Cassino, one soldier muttered, rubbing mud from his rifle. Looks like God himself built that place to keep us out. Another soldier spat into the dirt. Then we'll have to knock on heaven's door the hard way. For weeks, the Allied armies had battered themselves against the Gustav Line, a fortress of concrete, mines, and machine guns stretching across Italy. The Germans, commanded by Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had chosen their ground well. Monte Cassino, with its commanding view over the valley, was their crown jewel. Every Allied movement below could be seen, every column of tanks targeted, or so the commanders believed. But here lay the great misunderstanding. The monastery itself was empty of German troops. Inside its sacred halls, only monks and refugees took shelter. Still, the Allied intelligence reports said otherwise. Recon photos showed figures moving near the walls. Observers claimed radio signals were coming from the hilltop. The logic was brutal. If the enemy could use it, then it had to be destroyed. In the Allied headquarters in Naples, the tension was suffocating. Cigarette smoke filled the command tent as General Mark Clark stood over a map dotted with red and blue pins. His voice was calm but sharp. If the monastery gives them the advantage, we can't afford to let it stand. A young intelligence officer shifted uneasily. Sir, there's still no solid evidence Germans are inside. We could be bombing civilians, monks. Clark's eyes hardened. If they're not there now, they will be. Give the order. Outside, the winter air bit like knives. Pilots checked their bomb payloads, ground crews fueling the flying fortresses that would soon unleash hell. The monastery loomed in the distance, its white walls glowing faintly in the morning sun. To the men below, it looked almost peaceful, almost divine. In a monastery courtyard, Father Gregorio, one of the Benedictine monks, knelt before the altar. Around him, children and elderly refugees prayed quietly, their voices trembling with each rumble of artillery in the valley below. God will protect his house, one whispered. Father Gregorio's eyes drifted upward to the crucifix, cracked from years of age. He may not, he murmured, not this time. By 8:30 a.m., the sky began to vibrate with the sound of engines. The monks heard it first, then the soldiers, then the civilians. It was like the roar of 1,000 beasts growing louder, closer. Birds fled from the mountain. The children screamed. The old men clutched their rosaries. And then the first bombs fell. From 20,000 feet, 142 American B-17s released their payloads. A second wave followed with B-25s. Each bomb, a steel cylinder of death, tumbled silently through the clouds before slamming into the sacred rock. The first explosion tore through the library wing, ancient manuscripts burning into ash before anyone could react. The second hit the chapel. The air turned red and gray, filled with dust and screams. Down below, Allied soldiers watched in silence. Some cheered, others just stared. Sergeant Tom Wilson of the 36th Infantry Division later wrote in his diary, "We watched the sky fall on that mountain. It was the most beautiful and the most terrible thing I've ever seen. For 3 hours, the bombardment continued. 576 tons of high explosives fell on Monte Cassino. Walls that had stood for 1,400 years crumbled like sand. Marble statues shattered. The great dome collapsed, sending waves of dust across the valley. Even miles away, the shock waves could be felt. When the last plane turned away and the sound faded into the clouds, a strange quiet took hold. The mountain, once white, now black with smoke, was gone. The monastery had ceased to exist. The mountain of God was now a mountain of ruin. In the afternoon, American spotters reported the target successfully neutralized. Radio chatter celebrated a victory. But on the mountain, there was no victory, only death. Under the rubble, survivors clawed through debris. Father Gregorio pulled a dying boy from the ashes, his hands bleeding, eyes filled with horror. "We prayed for mercy," he later recalled. But mercy did not answer. That evening, the wind carried ashes over the valley, mixing with snow, falling softly on helmets, rifles, and mud. The soldiers below didn't know it yet, but the bombing they believed would break the German line had done the opposite. The monastery, now a pile of ruins, offered perfect cover for the German paratroopers who would soon move in and fortify it. The destruction of Monte Cassino had opened not the gates of Rome, but the gates of hell. As night fell, the fires still burned. From miles away, pilots returning to base could see the glow on the horizon, like a dying sun. The monastery that had once stood for peace now burned as a monument to mankind's madness. A British war correspondent wrote the next day, "We destroyed a symbol of faith in order to win a hill. And in doing so, we may have lost something greater than victory." The next morning, the surviving monks were led down the mountain under white flags. Their faces were gray with dust, their robes torn. One of them carried the broken crucifix from the chapel, its wooden Christ split in half. When a soldier asked him what he would do now, the monk only said, "We will rebuild, but not all ruins can be rebuilt." Valley of the Dead. The smoke had not yet lifted. The valley below Monte Cassino was unrecognizable, a graveyard of steel, stone, and men. Where olive trees once grew, there were only splintered trunks and craters filled with muddy water. The roar of bombers had faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the slow moan of the dying. American medics stumbled through the wreckage, calling out names no one answered. Shattered helmets lay half buried in the mud, rifles sticking out of the earth like crosses. The monastery above still smoldered, its broken arches glowing red under the winter sun. What had once been God's mountain now looked like the mouth of hell. From the shadows of the ruined hills, the Germans stirred. Paratroopers of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division moved like phantoms through the debris, reoccupying the abbey's ruins. Dust still fell from the shattered ceiling as they set up machine guns where monks once prayed. Their commander, Colonel Heilmann, looked up at the fractured dome and muttered, "Now the holy mountain is ours." Below them, the Allies were preparing to climb again. But they were not ready, not in spirit, not in strength. Many had seen the bombing with their own eyes and felt something break inside them. To destroy a monastery was one thing. To fight and die among its ruins was another. The next morning, the valley came alive again, not with birdsong, but with artillery. From the Allied side, hundreds of guns opened fire, their shells screaming into the slopes. The mountain shuddered under the bombardment. The Americans advanced once more, stepping over bodies frozen in prayer. Sergeant James Holloway, who had watched the abbey burn the day before, led his men through a river of mud and blood. His boots sank deep into the earth with every step. "Keep moving," he shouted, though his voice cracked with exhaustion. Behind him, Private Daniel Rees carried the unit's radio, its antenna bent and muddy. He glanced up at the monastery, a black silhouette against the gray sky. "You think he's still up there?" Rees muttered. "Oh, God." Holloway didn't answer. He just kept walking. Every few meters, mortar shells burst around them, showering the men with dirt and bone. The valley echoed with cries, English, German, Italian, blending into one endless wail. The Allies called it the Valley of Death. The soldiers called it something else. The Valley of the Forgotten. That afternoon, they reached the base of the hill. The climb began. The path to the monastery twisted through rubble and ruins, past burned-out tanks and shattered farmhouses. Snipers waited in the shadows. Every window was a threat. Every rock could hide a gun. The Indian 4th Division joined the assault, their Gurkha soldiers climbing the cliffs with knives and ropes, silent as ghosts. They fought not for faith or country, but for survival. In their diaries, they wrote that the mountain smelled of dust, blood, and old stone, like a tomb that never ends. From above, German paratroopers unleashed machine gun fire. Each bullet cut through the mist like a scream. The Allies pressed on anyway, inch by inch, man by man. The valley floor below became a field of broken bodies, uniforms of green, brown, and gray mixing together in the mud. By nightfall, neither side had moved more than a few hundred meters. February 17th. Rain fell. Cold, merciless rain. The mountain turned into a river of mud. Tanks couldn't move. Wounded men drowned where they lay. The rain mixed with blood until it looked like rust. From his position in a shell crater, Holloway looked down at his trembling hands. "We're not fighting men anymore," he whispered. "We're fighting the mountain." The monastery's ruins flashed with muzzle fire, each spark briefly illuminating the broken statues of saints. Their faces were cracked, eyeless, half-buried, silent witnesses to the slaughter. A British chaplain moved between the dead and dying, carrying no weapon, only a small wooden cross. He knelt beside a wounded soldier, German or Allied, it didn't matter anymore, and prayed quietly. "Lord, forgive us, for we know not what we do." Above them, the mountain thundered again as artillery struck. The chaplain disappeared in the blast. Meanwhile, the German radio operator inside the monastery sent a chilling message. "We hold the mountain. The valley is filled with their dead." He didn't exaggerate. For every yard of ground gained, the Allies lost dozens of men. The air smelled of gunpowder and decay. Dogs howled at night, scavenging among the corpses. The living slept beside the dead, too tired to care. Private Rees scribbled in his notebook. "They say this valley leads to Rome. Maybe it does. Maybe it leads somewhere else. I used to think war was about courage. Now I think it's about endurance. Who can keep walking through hell without falling apart?" February 18th. At dawn, the valley filled with fog. You couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Yet still, the orders came, "Advance." The fog muffled the sounds of war, the screams, the gunfire, the dying. It was almost peaceful. Holloway's platoon moved like ghosts, slipping between rocks and ruins. Somewhere ahead, a machine gun opened up. Bullets tore through the mist. Men fell silently. When the fog lifted hours later, the ground was littered with bodies again. The same valley, the same mountain, the same death. Nothing had changed. For the men still standing, it felt like time itself had stopped, trapped in a loop of destruction. At headquarters, General Mark Clark stared at the reports. Another failed assault. Thousands more casualties. The Gustav line still held. He rubbed his temples, exhausted. "How many times," he asked, "must we take that damn mountain?" No one answered. Outside, the rain began again. That night, under a blood-red sky, Sergeant Holloway sat by a small fire. He pulled out his notebook, its pages torn and damp. He wrote, "We came to free Italy, but all we've done is bury her sons. Ours too. Maybe the mountain isn't cursed. Maybe we are." Nearby, Private Rees hummed to him, something his mother used to sing, though his voice trembled. It was a song about peace. But on Monte Cassino, peace felt like a myth. In the distance, church bells rang, not from the monastery, but from the ruined town below. Someone had found an old bell that still worked. Its sound drifted through the valley like a ghost of the world before the war. For a moment, everyone, American, German, British, Indian, stopped firing. The bell rang again, echoing between the cliffs. Some soldiers crossed themselves. Others wept quietly. Then the shooting resumed. By the end of the second battle, the Allies had gained nothing. The mountain still belonged to the Germans. The abbey, once the heart of European Christianity, was now a fortress of death. The valley below was a sea of graves. They called it the Valley of the Dead for a reason, because no one who fought there ever forgot what they saw. The cost of war was no longer measured in miles gained or lost. It was measured in sanity and souls. In the valley beneath Monte Cassino, thousands fell, not just to bullets, but to the unbearable weight of war itself. The line did not move, but something else did: faith. Men stopped praying to win. They prayed simply to survive. And as night fell over the valley once more, the mountains stood silent, waiting for the next wave of men to climb its cursed slopes. The iron line. The mountains still burned in the distance, a black scar against the winter sky. Weeks had passed since the first bombs fell on Monte Cassino, yet the guns never slept. Every night, the horizon flashed red, like the heartbeat of a dying god. The Allies had thrown everything at the Gustav Line: Americans, British, Indians, New Zealanders, and the mountain had swallowed them all. Now, as the cold winds of April swept through the valley, a new army stood waiting beneath the ruins. They were the men of the Polish II Corps, commanded by General Władysław. Veterans of Siberian camps, survivors of exile, they had fought their way from the frozen wastes of Russia to the rocky hills of Italy. They were not just soldiers. They were ghosts of a lost nation, fighting for a homeland that no longer existed on any map. To them, Monte Cassino was not just another battle. It was redemption, and perhaps revenge. The Germans still held the high ground. The 1st Parachute Division, the same men who had survived the first bombing, watched from the monastery ruins like hawks. They had transformed the shattered abbey into an iron fortress. Machine guns peered from beneath broken arches. Mortars were hidden under collapsed domes. The Gustav Line below them stretched for miles. Trenches, barbed wire, bunkers dug into the very bones of the mountain. The Allies called it the Iron Line, and for good reason. It was said that even the devil would hesitate to attack. As dawn broke, the Poles gathered in silence. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled of cordite and death. Chaplains moved among the men, offering communion and words of courage. Some kissed small medals of St. Mary. Others simply stared up at the monastery, its shadow falling across their faces. General Anders walked among his troops, his greatcoat dusted with ash. "Remember," he said, "this is not just a mountain. This is a symbol. We fight for every Polish soul buried without a grave, for every home we lost, for every prayer unanswered." The men nodded, their faces set like stone. There was no more fear, only purpose. The assault began at 3 a.m., May 11th, 1944. The night exploded with sound. Allied artillery, more than 1,000 guns, opened fire in one of the heaviest bombardments of the Italian campaign. For hours, the mountain was lit up like day, its slopes burning under a rain of fire. From the valley below, the thunder never stopped. Shells screamed overhead. Rocks shattered. Trees burst into flame. The Poles waited in their trenches, counting the seconds. When the shelling ceased, a silence even more terrifying followed. Then came the order: advance. They moved uphill into the smoke. The ground trembled beneath their boots. The men could barely see more than a few feet ahead. All around them, the earth was torn open by craters and bodies. Machine guns opened from above. The Germans had survived. Again, the Poles pressed forward anyway. Captain Jan Nowak led the 3rd Carpathian Division up the northern slope. He carried a Polish flag folded under his tunic, a promise to plant it atop the monastery when victory came. Bullets cut through the mist like wasps. Men fell beside him, one after another, but the flag never touched the ground. Every meter cost blood. Every step forward was a prayer. By dawn, the slopes of Monte Cassino were painted red, the rain mixing with the blood of two nations, both clinging to the same rock for reasons neither could fully understand. In the ruins above, the German paratroopers held fast. They fought with the precision of a veteran who had long accepted death. Their commander, Major Richard Heydrich, sent a message to headquarters: the enemy comes in waves. They fight like lions. Then, quietly to himself, he added, perhaps they fight for something we cannot see. The Poles fought through broken walls and burned-out bunkers, their boots crunching over shattered crucifixes and bones. The monastery loomed closer, each step a climb through centuries of faith and fury. May 12th. The battle raged for another night. Rain fell again, turning the slopes into rivers of mud. Wounded men screamed for medics who would never come. German flares lit the sky in eerie blue, casting ghostly shadows over the dead. Private Pyotr Zelinsky wrote in his blood-stained journal, "The rain washes everything away. Fear, dirt, names. But not the sound of dying. The mountain doesn't care who wins. It just takes." He was found days later, his journal still clutched in his hand. WWII the third day. The Polish advance had stalled. The Germans counterattacked with grenades and bayonets. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out among the ruins of the village below the abbey. The stones ran slick with blood. The mountain echoed with shouts in Polish, German, and Italian. A symphony of chaos. In one crater, a wounded German soldier and a Polish medic faced each other. The medic, exhausted, dropped his rifle and reached for his kit. The German nodded weakly. "We are the same," he whispered in broken English. Then a shell hit nearby, and both were gone. WWII May 17th. The Poles had lost thousands. The mountains seemed impregnable, but still they climbed. Reinforcements poured in. Their determination burned hotter than fear. They carried the memory of exile, of frozen Siberian nights, of families lost to war. To retreat was unthinkable. At dawn, the final assault began. The 12th Podolian Ulan advanced through the last line of wire, bayonets fixed. Artillery shells fell dangerously close behind them. The air was filled with dust and screams. When the smoke cleared, they were inside the monastery grounds, inside the shattered abbey. The German paratroopers, those who remained, prepared for the end. Many had run out of ammunition. They prayed quietly amid the ruins, surrounded by broken icons and burning candles. Their commander gave the final order: "Hold until you can hold no more." Outside, the Poles surged through the rubble. The fighting lasted hours. By afternoon, the shooting had stopped. A white flag appeared above the stones. Silence. For the first time in months, the guns of Monte Cassino fell quiet. As the sun set, Captain Nowak climbed what remained of the monastery steps. He unfolded the flag from beneath his tunic, the red and white of Poland, and raised it high above the ruins. The wind caught it, and for a moment it seemed to breathe. Below, the valley shimmered in the evening light. Smoke drifted like ghosts. Men watched in silence, some smiling, others weeping. The mountain that had swallowed thousands finally belonged to the living again. That night, General Anders wrote in his diary, "We have taken Monte Cassino, but victory tastes of ash. Too many sons of Poland sleep on this mountain. Too many prayers unanswered." The monastery was a ruin, its walls reduced to dust. But amid that devastation, something remarkable happened. Both sides, Poles and Germans, helped bury their dead. Together, they carried bodies down the slope. There were no enemies now. Only men. One German sergeant, his arm in a sling, approached a Polish officer. He pointed at the monastery and said, "You fought well. Maybe this is how we earn forgiveness." Epilogue. The iron line broken. The fall of Monte Cassino opened the road to Rome. The Gustav Line, the Iron Line, was shattered at last. But the victory came at a price too heavy to measure. Over 55,000 Allied casualties. Thousands more Germans dead or missing. The Poles left a cemetery beneath the mountain, 1,051 graves, marked with simple white crosses. On the gate, a single inscription reads, "For our freedom and yours." As the sun rose over the graves, the monastery's bells rang again, not in triumph, but in mourning. The mountain had finally fallen, but in its shadow, humanity had risen, bruised and broken, yet somehow still reaching for the light. The Iron Line was not defeated by firepower or numbers. It was broken by will, by the men who refused to die quietly, who carried their homeland in their hearts up a mountain of death. Monte Cassino became a monument, not to victory, but to endurance, a place where faith, fury, and forgiveness met beneath the same sky. The road to Rome. The mountain was silent at last. Monte Cassino, once the formidable heart of the Gustav line, lay in ruins, its shattered walls silhouetted against a gray dawn. The Poles had raised their flag, and the Germans had retreated, leaving behind only echoes and ashes. The Iron Line had fallen, but the road to Rome was far from easy. The Liri Valley still reeked of gunpowder, blood, and the unhealed wounds of soldiers. Mud, rain, and the stench of decay clung to every step. The Allies had broken the enemy's line, yet the victory was incomplete. Every advance carried the weight of loss, the dead still littering the slopes, the survivors scarred and silent. General Mark Clark surveyed the valley from a command post hastily erected among the rubble. Maps of Italy were pinned on canvas walls, dotted with red and blue markers, each representing men who had fought, died, or would soon. He rubbed his eyes. "Rome is open," he said, "but at what cost?" Reports came in, columns of British, American, and Polish soldiers moving cautiously toward the outskirts of the city. Refugees began returning to bombed-out villages, their faces pale with grief. Children wandered through streets once filled with laughter, now reduced to ruins and rubble. The Allies advanced slowly, mindful of German rearguard units still in the hills. Every hilltop and ruin was a potential trap. Mines littered the roads, hidden beneath broken stones or mud. Snipers fired from rooftops, claiming soldiers one by one. The march toward Rome was not a celebration. It was survival. American Private Daniel Rees, his notebook still clutched in his bloodied hands, recorded each moment. "We move through what remains of a world that once belonged to someone else. Every step forward feels like stealing something sacred. Rome waits ahead, but the road is lined with the dead." Nearby, Sergeant Holloway kept his men in formation, leading cautiously through fields scarred by artillery. He glanced back at Monte Cassino, its ruins hidden by morning mist. "We took the mountain," he muttered, "but it took pieces of us with it." Meanwhile, the Germans regrouped on the north side of the valley. General Heinrich von Weidenhoff, commanding the remaining forces in Italy, surveyed the chaos with a grim expression. "They have broken through," he said. "Rome is exposed, but the Allies will pay for every step." German rearguard units launched counterattacks along narrow passes and roads, slowing the Allied advance. Engineers and sappers worked frantically to clear mines, while artillery continued to fire sporadically from hidden emplacements. Every yard gained was met with resistance, every village a trap. Amid the chaos, civilians tried to survive. Families emerged from cellars, carrying what little they could salvage. The war had left Italy's landscape a graveyard of dreams. Churches were gutted, homes reduced to foundations, and roads cratered from constant shelling. Yet, in spite of it all, life persisted. Markets reopened, children laughed cautiously, and the bells of surviving churches rang faintly across the valley. As the Allied columns moved north, the psychological toll became apparent. Soldiers were exhausted, physically and mentally. The trauma of Monte Cassino lingered like a shadow over every step. PTSD was unrecognized, yet deeply felt. Men whispered to one another at night, recounting the horrors. Friends killed beside them, cries of the dying echoing in fog and mud. Captain Jan Nowak, leading Polish troops, wrote, "We march toward Rome not in triumph, but in mourning. The mountain is behind us, yet walks with us in every step. Every street, every hill, every shattered wall reminds us of what we've lost." The first approach to Rome was met with German defensive positions along the Trasimene line, hastily erected after the fall of the Gustav line. Mines, trenches, and artillery emplacements slowed the Allied advance. Air support from American and British forces targeted strategic points, yet collateral damage remained high. Italian civilians watched from shadows, torn between hope and fear. Some whispered prayers for liberation. Others feared what the Allies might do next. In one village, an elderly man spoke to a passing American patrol, "Rome is holy. If you destroy it, you destroy the soul of Italy." The soldiers, exhausted and haunted by Monte Cassino, nodded silently. No one knew what lay ahead. WWII late April 1944. The Allies approached the outskirts of Rome. The city, though spared from the devastation of Monte Cassino, bore its own scars: bombed-out factories, gutted apartment blocks, and refugee camps spilling into streets. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and tension. General Clark organized the final push. Allied artillery prepared to fire, while engineers cleared the road for infantry. Tanks rumbled through the mud, their treads leaving deep scars in the streets. Private Rees wrote in his notebook, "Rome waits, silent and patient. We climb over what was left of men, mountains, and hope. The city seems alive, yet it holds its breath. It knows war has come." The psychological landscape mirrored the physical one. Soldiers carried guilt from Monte Cassino. Many questioned the morality of their actions. Was the destruction necessary? Did victory justify the cost? These questions echoed silently in tents, foxholes, and rubble-strewn streets. Chaplain Father Michael moved among the troops, offering counsel, prayer, and a quiet ear. He witnessed men weeping over letters, photographs, and the memories of home. "Faith survives even here," he noted. "Even when mountains fall and cities burn, the human spirit clings to hope." By early June 1944, the final obstacles fell. The German rearguard retreated north, leaving Rome's outskirts exposed. The Allies entered the city cautiously, mindful of both civilians and remaining mines. The streets were a mixture of triumph and mourning. Soldiers marched past fountains and churches, waving flags, but their faces were grim. The cost of the road, Monte Cassino and beyond, was etched into every man. In one square, a group of Polish soldiers paused. Captain Nowak unfolded the flag they had raised on the abbey. The city seemed to hold its breath as the red and white banner flapped in the summer wind. Civilians peeked from windows, some weeping, some cheering. Rome was free, but victory came at a price. Tens of thousands of soldiers dead or wounded. Entire villages destroyed. Monte Cassino reduced to rubble. The moral and psychological scars of men and women forever altered. Yet, amidst the ruin, life endured. Italians began rebuilding. Soldiers wrote letters home. Monks from Monte Cassino, having survived the bombardment, returned to salvage what they could. Father Gregorio, one of the survivors, later reflected, "Rome endures, as does faith. But we will never forget the mountains we climbed, the valleys we walked through, and the souls who never followed us home." The road to Rome was more than miles of earth and stone. It was a path carved by blood, courage, and loss. Monte Cassino had tested the Allies, shattered illusions, and demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Rome stood free, yet every stone whispered of what had been given and taken along the way. The city's liberation was not merely a military victory. It was a testament to the endurance of human spirit, haunted by memory and tempered in fire. Echoes of faith. The mountain was silent now, but its shadow stretched far beyond the valley. Monte Cassino, once the pinnacle of the Gustav Line, had been conquered, yet the echoes of gunfire and human suffering lingered like a ghost over the hills. The ruins of the abbey stood as a solemn reminder. Centuries of faith reduced to stone, dust, and memory. All around the valley, the surviving soldiers moved cautiously, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. The victory was won, but its cost could not be measured in medals or maps. It was measured in absence, in families lost, comrades buried in unmarked graves, and souls fractured by war. In the days following the conquest, Allied troops began the grim task of clearing the battlefield. Medical units pulled the wounded from the mud and craters. Engineers worked to remove mines and debris. Soldiers stumbled upon items left behind, fragments of life, letters, shoes, rosaries, and photographs. Each object told a story of interrupted lives, of dreams shattered mid-step. Captain Jan Nowak of the Polish II Corps walked through the ruins, his flag folded carefully under his arm. The monastery walls were nothing but rubble, yet he could still feel the weight of its presence. Every step stirred dust and memories of the dead. "We thought taking the mountain would bring peace," he murmured. But all it brought was remembrance. The Italian civilians returned slowly to the valley. They picked through what remained of their homes, salvaging what they could. Children, their faces pale with hunger and fear, followed elders through broken streets. Some whispered prayers. Others cursed the Allies and Germans alike. The war had left no room for innocence. One elderly woman, Maria, knelt amidst the rubble of her home and said, "We survive, but the mountain remains with us. The bells are silent, yet I hear them still." Her words captured a truth understood by all. Monte Cassino was more than a battlefield. It was a symbol of endurance, faith, and a heavy price of human ambition. The surviving monks of Monte Cassino returned in small groups. Father Gregorio and a few others began the slow process of salvaging sacred artifacts. Crosses, candles, and manuscript had survived, partially buried beneath the rubble. They worked quietly, their hands steady despite trembling hearts. "We will rebuild," Father Gregorio said to his companions. Faith does not die because walls fall. It lives in the hearts of those who remember. For the soldiers who remained in the valley, rebuilding was not limited to stone and mortar. They had to rebuild themselves, confronting the trauma of what they had seen and done. Private Daniel Rees wrote in his notebook, "We carry the mountain within us now. Its weight cannot be lifted by maps or medals. It can only be carried, remembered, and honored." The process of remembrance extended beyond the battlefield. Cemeteries were established for the fallen, Polish, American, British, and even German soldiers. Simple white crosses marked graves on the slopes of Monte Cassino. Each one bore witness to the universality of suffering. Chaplain Father Michael oversaw ceremonies for both the living and the dead. Soldiers and civilians gathered, offering prayers, flowers, and quiet reflection. Some wept openly. Others stood in silence, staring at the horizon where Monte Cassino had dominated the skyline. "War takes everything," the chaplain said. "But in memory, we can find something worth keeping: honor, courage, and the souls who walked beside us, now gone." Over the following months, the monastery began to rise from the ruins. Architects and workers, many Italian, labored to restore what had been lost. Stone by stone, wall by wall, the abbey was rebuilt, not to erase history, but to preserve it. Tourists and pilgrims would later visit Monte Cassino, not only for the abbey, but for the stories embedded in its stones. Each scar told of sacrifice, endurance, and the complex morality of war. Visitors were reminded that even in destruction, there is meaning, a testament to resilience and faith. For the veterans, the echoes of Monte Cassino never fully faded. Captain Nowak and Sergeant Holloway returned home, carrying medals and stories, but also the memories of comrades who would never return. "The mountain stays with you," Holloway said years later. "Not as a place, but as a voice. It reminds you what we were capable of, both the worst and the best." Private Rees, who had survived the valley and the mountain, returned to civilian life in America. He often wrote letters to his family about the courage he had seen, but also the sorrow that haunted him. "Rome is free," he wrote, "but freedom has a price. We paid it here on the mountain of God, in the valley of the dead. We remember so that it may not be in vain." By the 1950s, Monte Cassino was fully restored. The abbey rang with bells once more. Monks resumed their prayers. Pilgrims lit candles and whispered their own hopes. Yet beneath the restored stones, history remained, a silent record of fire, blood, and humanity tested to its limits. Scholars later wrote extensively about the battle. The Allied victory was lauded strategically, yet historians emphasize the moral and psychological complexities. The bombing of the monastery, the staggering loss of life, and the endurance of soldiers and civilians alike became a focal point in studies of war ethics. The valley, now green and peaceful, still bore faint scars from the artillery, craters, and trenches. Locals told stories to children of the battles that once raged, teaching them about courage, sacrifice, and the cost of freedom. "The mountain speaks," one villager said. "Listen, and you will hear the prayers, the cries, and the hope that survived all of it. The echoes of faith, courage, and loss carried on through generations." Monte Cassino was no longer just a battlefield. It was a monument to endurance, a testament to the resilience of humanity, and a reminder that even in war's darkest hours, hope and memory endure. Monte Cassino fell and rose again. Soldiers marched, fought, and died. Civilians fled and returned. Monks rebuilt their sanctuary. Rome was liberated, yet the mountain's shadow lingered over all who had touched it. The echoes of faith in God, in humanity, and in one another persisted beyond destruction. They whispered of courage, of sorrow, of sacrifice. And as the abbey bells rang once more, the world remembered. Victory comes at a cost, but endurance, memory, and hope endure far longer than stone. The mountain of God teaches us this. Even in the ashes, even in the valley of the dead, humanity finds a way to rise again.